Hi, praise God. This is Manoj Reddy. So I'm excited to be back for this next video in this series in which I'm sharing my testimony of how God led me from being jobless to Mercedes Benz and beyond. And so in the last video we had seen how God took me to Chennai, and then how I struggled initially for finances, and God provided for me. God became my provider in that moment, in that season, and I learned to trust God by experience, by applying His word. And the other part of that story is when I entered into Chennai, I joined into an environment which was a high octane environment, wherein I had to work faster than I had ever worked before, because this company was a startup, and they were churning at a high rate. So that was really fun for me, where I started learning new things, and I really enjoyed, though initially the 2 months which I worked there, I was focused only on development. So I was dreaming of being this great development engineer, and I finally was like, I'm getting to work on what I've always looked forward to working on. And so this happens during this course. Amma canteen was going on one side, the financial crisis. But in the first few months, I started working. I developed some device drivers and software. And shortly after that, my boss arranged for some interviews for me, for the client's location. And so two such interviews in the development domain I failed. And I did not fail because I did not know the concepts, but because I was so self-conscious that I would enter into the interview, and when I was not able to answer some questions, I would just give up right there in the interview, and I would beat up myself, saying, like, you're a failure. You could have worked harder. You should have just worked harder. You should have just put in more effort. And at the end of the day, in every interview, for every time I got rejected, every time I saw a failure, my dependency on myself was just going on increasing. And then I was becoming extremely self-conscious and self-aware, to the place where I could not see myself succeeding, and this constant fear was there of failing. And though in these two interviews the answers were not very difficult, these questions, if I think back, I knew the answers to them. But because of this intimidation that I had inside me, because of this poor image that I had inside me, I would go into the interviews and freeze, and I would not be able to answer the most simplest questions, because I would not be able to recollect them. And it was very frustrating, because after the interview I would beat up on myself. And this happened, two different times. And so what I saw is, during my time there, my boss had basically let go two people. He had basically removed two people who were working for him, because of performance issues. And so after failing these two interviews, I thought I'm the next one. And the way my boss would remove people was, he would invite them into the conference room, say, like, I want to have a discussion with you. And then shortly after that, I would not see them. So they basically, from that week or from that next day, they would stop coming to office. And so this is the time where God began to teach me. So this was going parallel to my financial crisis as well. And what I would do is, during the lunchtime, many a times, because of these interviews, I had to go home and prepared as well. So I would go to my PG where I was staying, and after office hours I would stay up, and I would learn things, understand new concepts, for prepare for the interview basically. And morning I would get up and come to office. So during this whole season, or during this whole time where I was preparing for interview, I was not getting time for God. And so what I began to do is, in my lunchtime, I would skip lunch. I would just go to the shop nearby. I would buy a banana cake. It would be a round cake, and the taste was really good. But just a small piece of cake, and one small bottle of juice. And I would take that, and that would be my lunch. And that was because I could just consume it quickly. So I would come back, in the IIT research park where I was working. At the down area, this lawn was beautiful. So I would just go and sit there for this one entire hour, and it would just be me and Jesus. And I would be reading the word, I would be listening to teachings, and God would be speaking to me there. So one fine day, I'm reading the story of Gideon. And I come to the place where Gideon has too many people, Gideon has like initially when if you don't know the story of Gideon, I would suggest that you go and read Judges 6, 7, and 8, and it's an amazing story. But while I was reading that, God speaks to me, and the basically the gist of the story was Gideon was a man who considered himself to be very weak, but God uses him, and through God's strength, God brings the victory. So there is a time where Gideon has 32,000 people ready for battle, but God says these people are too many for me to use, and so God cuts down the number of people. He filters them out. So in the end, only 300 people are left, and God takes Gideon with these 300 people, and they go and win a battle. And I'd calculated once, win a battle against 1,35,000 Midianites, just these 300 people, and they don't even do it with their natural strength. It's a beautiful story. So there's a phrase where God tells Gideon that you have too many people for me to use you, because if I use you, and if I give you victory with all these people that you have, then you will think that the victory came with your strength. And so while I'm reading this, I hear the Father speak into my heart, and he says, are you too good of an engineer for me to use you? And this was a weird thought. I'd never thought like this before. And God is saying to me, are you too good of an engineer? Focus on my words. He didn't ask me, are you too bad of an engineer? Because that's what I believed. I didn't have the skill, I didn't have the experience, because I had not worked on the right kind of projects, and because of that, I felt like I'd always be behind. But here God was asking me, are you too good of an engineer for me to use you? And I was like, what are you trying to say, Lord? And he says, you've been relying on your ability or the lack of your ability, and you've been focusing on what you do not have. And then he also showed me in Romans 4, where it says, Abraham did not consider his own body which was dead, and neither the deadness of Sarah's womb. So God basically told me that you have to stop considering your faults and your mistakes, and your shortcomings. And you have to believe that I am bigger than whatever lack you have or you've created. You might be responsible for it, or you may not be responsible for it. But you have to believe that I am bigger than whatever mess you can make. And that was a hard thing to swallow, because I'd never thought that way. I'd always been taught, and I'd always believed that you have to deserve things, you have to earn things in the world. Yeah, God loves you unconditionally, God loves you by grace, God loves you by faith, but in the world you have to go out and earn things. That's how the world is working, and it's the law of the world. And that's what I had believed, and I was bashing myself up for not being up to the mark. But this really blew my mind, and God is like, are you too good of an engineer for me to use you? So that's where this thing started breaking in me. And so I'd already failed 2 interviews by this time, and but the next interview which was happening was going to be for an entirely different field, not for embedded systems. So I initially the initial part of my career, I was working as a development engineer. Currently I'm working as a software testing engineer, and I also keep brushing up my development skills because I don't want to leave them. Yeah, in a few years I'll be owning multiple businesses, so I won't be working a job forever. I'm growing in that phase as well. But to come back to the place here, testing was something that I'd never touched. I didn't even know the concepts of testing, the types of testing that there are. And during this period, when they started telling me that we're going to put you for an interview in Mercedes Benz, and it was purely a God thing, because I could not have entered on my own, and God was the one who opened up the door. And exactly for us, this project in which I entered, it was related to something I had worked on in the past, in the previous company where I'd left. So that was just perfectly God. He lined up things in a way where I don't want to get into all the details, because this video will just go on forever otherwise. But God fixed it in such a way where this interview was perfectly created, the spot was perfectly created just for me. And on the other side, coming back to the struggle that I was having with my lack of skills, God is telling me, are you too good of an engineer for me to use you? And then he gives me another story of King Jehoshaphat in Second Chronicles 20. And there we see that three kings have come against King Jehoshaphat to kill him, to destroy him. You can imagine one army and against three different nations' armies. And so here Jehoshaphat gathers the entire country, and then they're all praying, asking for God's help. And God tells him, you'll not even have to fire a single arrow in this battle, and I'm going to fight this on your behalf. And that's where Jehoshaphat says, the battle belongs to the Lord. And so the way the story ends is, these three kings, these three armies have basically killed each other in their greed until the last man died. And so Jehoshaphat, when he's going, he doesn't know this, but he's believing what God said, and in going towards the battle, he's putting worshippers in the forefront of the battle. Now, any person with a common sense would be putting up their best defenses in the front. But because Jehoshaphat actually believed that God had given him the victory, he put up worshippers in the front, and then they reach the battlefield. They find all these three armies have killed each other, and the only thing left to do there is to collect the spoils, to collect all the gold, silver, pearls, all the weapons, all the animals that these people had brought, as to sustain and to have victory over Jehoshaphat. Now those kings, all their wealth and everything, that was taken by the king and his people. And so through these stories, God basically taught me, you have to stop relying on your lack and stop focusing on what you do not have. Stop focusing on the mess that you might have created. He taught me to take my focus off of that and put my faith in his blessing, put my faith in the favor of God on my life. And that was the best thing that I ever learned, and it's working wonders for me in my day to day, and I feel like I've just begun. And I'm excited that this favor of God is just going to keep on manifesting in a greater measure in my life every day. And so, coming back to the topic, here I am learning all these things, and then this interview is set up, and I'm still not fully confident of this interview, but I've learned enough, because in those days it was as if God is sitting next to me and teaching me the Bible. Like, he's teaching me the word. He's like, believe this, believe this, believe this, and you'll come out of this. And it was one of the most productive times of my life. So coming back to the day of the interview, I remember God trained my mind in such a way where I'm entering into this building, IIT Madras Research Park. I'm entering in, and I'm going to have a call with my people, with the manager who's going to interview me. And while entering into the building, I tell Jesus, I say, Jesus, I'm standing out here. I'm not giving this interview. You are the one who's giving this interview. Because that's what I've learned from Jehoshaphat. That's what I've learned from Gideon. And so I say, you are the one who's going to take this interview. And cutting the long story short, the interview did not go well. But God possessed the people involved in this interview. He gave me favor. I entered in. And that was the crazy thing. Like, I'll surely build upon this in the next video as well. But during the 7 months where I did not have jobs, I have a job. I really wanted a job, and there were many times where I'd cried for being rejected in an interview. But all of that changed on the day when I entered into the building of Benz India Research and Development, which is there in Bangalore. And so I'll be covering more on that in the next video. But the key points that I want to highlight from this part of the video is, God taught me to believe that He's bigger than the mess that I could create. He's bigger than any lack that I could create. I could be the ones responsible for creating that problem. We in a way have this perfectionist mentality many times in faith. We think unless I have messed up things, God can fix it. But if I am the one who's the weakest link, then I think there's no way God can help me, because we feel like somehow or the other we have to be strong in our skill set, in our own strength, for God to use us. But in reality, all we have to do is surrender to Him. And that's what I learned, and that's what I did, and it's worked wonders for me. And so That's how the door was opened for me to enter into Mercedes. There was a time I was jobless, and that year I'd entered, I'd cleared the interview for Mercedes Benz, and then I was headed to Bangalore for that. And the battle was not yet over. Though I entered in, there were so many things that happened. There were some very intense things that happened during this my course of being there in Mercedes Benz, and I have some great testimonies for that time. And there were some songs that came out of that season, and I'm also working parallelly to release these songs. So in the coming days, we'll be putting out these videos of the songs as well in the same channel. So I hope you're all subscribed and tuned in to the channel. Like this video and please continue with us. So we'll catch up in the next video. God bless you. I love you all.